This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a guest who has grinded out seriously a ton of content over the last few years in fantasy football. And he's also the world's biggest Jay Cutler fan, and he has no apologies about that. It's Dave Kluge from Footballguys. Welcome in, Dave.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Kevin. Been hoping to come on this show for a while. I've caught some episodes here and there. I love the episode that you just recently did with JJ Zacharyson, and that was fantastic. So really excited to talk a little bit about the industry and football guys and fantasy football and all that fun stuff today.
Sounds good. It's a thrill to have you on. Obviously, I've been watching your rise up within the industry over the last few years, and it's been fun to watch. Take me back to where it all began. Being a sports fan, growing up in Chicago. What was that like?
Well, I didn't really have a choice but to be a sports fan, and more specifically a Bears fan. I was born into a Bears family. My dad had season tickets while I was growing up. My grandpa was going to all the games, and that's what I do on Sundays: is sit around with my dad and my uncles and my grandpa, and we'd watch football, and that was pretty much it. Our weekends revolved around it in the winter. I say this all the time. I feel like there's a huge overlap between like people that live in the Midwest and in the Northeast and these like really cold areas, like where the winters are just brutal, and really passionate football fans. And I think for people that, get spoiled living in like Florida and California, they don't understand that when you live in a place like Chicago, where I grew up, you can't leave the house for like 4 months. Like, it is brutally cold outside. So you sit inside and you watch football, and that's how you get through the winter. And then the Super Bowl ends, and then the flowers start to come out, and the sun starts to come out through the clouds a little bit. So I grew up watching football with my, all the guys in my family. And that was actually when I got my first fantasy football league. It was before I was even 10 years old. My dad was a commissioner of a league where everybody would call in that morning with their lineups. And then we would be, sitting after the games, before the pre-show, before Sunday Night Football. We'd be trying to write down as many stats as we could catch so we can try to, guess what this was before internet fantasy football. So they were doing it all over the phone. And that was kind of my first taste into fantasy football. And then in 2000, that was my first year playing, and I was in his league and ended up winning the league as a 10-year-old kid. They kicked me out of the league the next year. They said that I was cheating. I just had a better team than everybody else, and I don't think they could handle getting whooped by a little kid. But that ignited the passion for me. I took a few years off of fantasy football, but then when I was 14 years old, I commissioned a league in high school. That was the first time I had ever commissioned a league. And then, that one kind of just flamed out after a few years, but then I started another league right out of high school. That's what I consider my home league now, and we are going into year 14 of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now I can relate to, I have an appreciation for the Bears fans. My first, I found football pretty early in life, and the first season that I remember was the '85 Bears winning the Super Bowl. So that was such an incredible team, like such incredible characters on that roster. Obviously, it's a legendary group, but that was my first favorite team was the 1985 Bears. So I got a big appreciation for the Bears, and obviously, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, Michael Jordan definitely had an impact. He was obviously the GOAT. So I love Chicago sports, from Seattle, but I got an appreciation for Chicago sports for sure.
I love that. And that was actually before my time. So I have not been alive for a Bears Super Bowl, unfortunately. I've gotten to, I've seen the Bulls win 6. I saw the Blackhawks win a few. I even lived in Wrigleyville when the Cubs won theirs. I'm a White Sox fan, so I got to see that. But man, I'm hoping I get to see a Bears Super Bowl in my lifetime, because it's been a brutal 30-something years.
Yeah, you have definitely had a bad batch of seasons with the Bears. Hence, obviously, you got to find some bright spots, and for you, Jay Cutler was one of them, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I just loved his personality. Like, well, I liked him when he was in Denver, first of all, just like a young gunslinger. That's always been the type of quarterback that I've been drawn to. Even as a Bears fan growing up, I loved Brett Favre. Like, I wasn't, grinding film. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I was just like, I love the way this guy plays. And then Jay Cutler came along when I was a little bit older, and I just saw so much of Brett Favre in Jay Cutler. So I was watching him in Denver, this 24-year-old throwing for 4,000 plus yards, just looking like he was going to be, a premier quarterback in the league. So I still remember it. I was 19 years old. I was working at Champ Sports at the time, selling shoes, a freshman in college, and got a call. Like, my phone started blowing up. This was before text messaging, so everybody's calling me up. I don't know if you saw the Bears traded for Jay Cutler. I was absolutely ecstatic. And I'll never forgive the Bears for what they did for him. I mean, he was a raw prospect, not a prospect at the time. He was already in the NFL, but he was still a project at that time. He was very raw. And I think that what happened is they just expected him to come in and just play savior. His first year, he had a punt and kick returner as his wide receiver one. He had no offensive line, and you just saw him regressing by the week. So that was brutal to see as a Bears fan, watching them take one of my favorite players, making the trade for him, and then just completely ruining his career after that.
Yeah, Favre's a good comp for him when it comes to the gunslinger mentality. I can see where that came from for sure, especially if he's your hometown quarter, if he's your home team's quarterback. I can see getting behind him for sure. So what eventually inspired you to start making fantasy football content?
Well, I think a lot of people that make fantasy football content have a similar sort of path. They're the one person in their league that just takes it like more seriously than everybody else. And I say this all the time, but there's so many people that take like cheap shots at like analysts and experts and they throw quotes around it and say that, you're not an expert or you're not an analyst. But I think that there's really a gray area. Like anybody who plays fantasy football and is passionate about fantasy football puts in the time and studies and tries to learn whatever they can to get whatever an edge. And at a certain point, doesn't that make you an analyst, right? Like you're analyzing the game, even like I don't know. I think the titles are kind of weird and there's some gray area there. But that's kind of what happened with me. Is it started off as I was just browsing Reddit, looking where I could try to get an edge at some, information that was on there. And then it started off with commenting a little bit and getting involved in the conversation. And then from there, I was writing basically full length, long form articles that I was publishing to Reddit. And I started doing that in 2017 and 2018. In 2019, somebody from Fantasy Pros reached out to me and they said, hey, this is some pretty good writing. Would you be interested in writing at Fantasy Pros? Now, at this time, I knew nothing about the industry. My only exposure to the industry was Reddit, where everybody is anonymous and there's no personalities, there's no egos. Everybody's just anonymously talking with each other. So the few people that I did know at the time were Mike Tagliere and Matthew Berry. And I knew Matthew Berry over at ESPN, Mike Tagliere at Fantasy Pros. So when they asked me if I wanted a job at Fantasy Pros, I just assumed, sweet, I'm going to be the next Mike Tagliere. That's why they reached out to me. I'm going to be heading their podcast and I'm going to be writing articles nonstop. That wasn't the case whatsoever. I started off doing NBA game recaps, just grinding my knuckles to the bone. This was on top of a full-time job that I had already. So I was doing NBA game recaps and injury updates and things like that. After doing about a year of NBA, then they moved me over to MLB, where I covered some teams in baseball, doing the same thing, game recaps, injury updates, things like that. And then it was going into the 2020 season, they let me start doing some NFL content. Same stuff, game recaps, injuries, and things like that. But I just knew that I wanted more. And I kept reaching out to the guys at Fantasy Pro saying, hey, can I get a chance to write a full-length article? Can I get a chance on a podcast? And I didn't realize that in this industry, you kind of have to build your own brand. So I thought that just being at Fantasy Pros, I'd be able to climb the ranks there, and tried that for a couple of years and it didn't work out. My good friend Adam Koffler, though, we got hired together at Fantasy Pros and we pushed each other on this news desk. It was very much so a numbers driven game. And we were trying to produce as much content as we possibly could every single month. It was Adam and I sitting at 1 and 2, just doing more than the other person. And he was the one that kept telling me, dude, you got to get on Twitter. If you're looking to grow your brand, if you're looking to grow in this industry, you got to get on Twitter. So it was early in 2020, right around the time that, everything shut down and quarantine and all that. And I had a little extra free time. So that's when I started tweeting into the abyss, had no followers, connected with a few people. Going into the 2020 season, I linked up with Elvin Ryan over at the Pregame HQ and Chase Vernon over at Fantasy Intervention. That's where I got some experience writing and publishing some full-length stuff. Got some experience doing business ops, kind of working on the back end, helping develop these websites. And then that's when I started podcasting as well. I didn't do my first podcast until midway through the 2020 season. And that's something that I realized that I just kind of naturally had a knack for, was podcasting and video content. So leaned a little bit heavier into that. And then by 2021, Joe Bryant and I had connected and I got a job at Footballguys and have been happily there ever since.
That's incredible. Yeah. So you have done a masterful job with sparking engagement on social media. I mean, once you showed up, I mean, you were all in. And so what was your strategy behind, the way that you had a presence on Twitter and social media?
So I knew early on that the hardest part in this industry was standing out. I mean, there are literally tens of thousands of people that are trying to make it in this industry. And I just realized that if I went with my against the grain takes, and it's not that I was purposely trying to say, things just for the sake of being a hot take or whatever, but I would look through my rankings and my projections, and then I'd look through the consensus rankings over whether it was Fantasy Pros or ADP from ESPN, and I'd try to find where there was a big divergence. And, one of the big ones going into the 2021 season, I said, I've got Debo Samuel as my wide receiver 21. Everybody else is ranking him as wide receiver 47 or whatever it was at the time. And there was a huge gap there. So I talked about Debo Samuel. And of course, everybody says, this guy's just blowing steam. These are hot takes, yeah, and I don't know. There's always friction when somebody's growing in the space. I wasn't intentionally just trying to make hot takes for the sake of making hot takes. I just knew that when you went against the grain, that is what would cause tweets to get engagement. I'd seen that as soon as I showed up, or as soon as I showed up in the space. So that's what I tried leaning into. And I would make the joke all the time. Nobody wants to hear that Christian McCaffrey is my RB1. Nobody wants to hear that Patrick Mahomes is the QB1. Everybody's saying that already. I'm going to try to find where I differ from the consensus and focus on that, explain my process and why I feel differently. And it just happened to work really well and help me grow a bit in the industry. That being said, I think the masses won eventually. They beat me down, and the hot takes and engagement farmers and all that, getting called that just nonstop when I was just trying to have fun and do my job. It did wear down on me quite a bit. And I've cut my tweeting down dramatically. I was just looking through the numbers a couple of days ago. I was tweeting 16 to 1800 times every single month when I got started in the industry, tweeting about 200 to 300 times a month these days. I've pulled back a little bit on Twitter, just looking at the risk reward. Twitter's a tough spot, and
Yeah.
it can be pretty toxic out there. So I focus more on my writing and my shows and what I can do with Football Guys. And I'm not quite as plugged into Twitter as I used to be.
Which is good. I think that's good for mental health. And speaking of that, I mean, obviously that's been an area that you have been an advocate for, mental health awareness, trying to break some stigmas when it comes to mental health and therapy. Where does that come from?
Well, I started realizing that I had some mental health struggles when I was young, like 14, 15 years old. I would have these like sweating attacks, and I would I was getting really forgetful, and there were things that were happening in high school, and I don't think that anybody in my family really took it seriously at the time. And this isn't me bashing my family. I totally understand it. We just chalked it up as, being a hormonal teenager, and that's it. Dave has his mood swings, and he's hormonal, and he has these anger outbursts, and he has these panic attacks, but he's a teenager, his hormones will balance and he'll get through it. And then right before my 16th birthday, I had a pretty bad, falling out where it ended with me jumping out of a window and ending up in the hospital. And I was in inpatient therapy. Actually spent my 16th birthday in inpatient therapy, and then a few months in outpatient therapy after that, and was heavily medicated and still just didn't really buy into it. I don't think anyone in my family did. They said, this was again just hormones. He'll snap out of it eventually. And then I just moved out at 19 years old and kept living my life with these mental health struggles and self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And I was getting in fights all the time, and I was staying out late, and I was just living a very destructive lifestyle. It was around age 25 that I realized, I can't keep living like this anymore. This is not sustainable. I saw where my future was headed, and it was going to be, in a coffin at a young age if I didn't change things around. So that was the first time that I went into therapy with a very open mind. And it wasn't, a doctor telling me I had to go to therapy. It wasn't a school counselor telling me I had to go to therapy, or my mom telling me I had to go to therapy. It was me as a 25-year-old adult saying, I want to make a change in my life. So I started going to therapy twice a week, and I didn't really see benefits at first. As a matter of fact, things actually got worse because I was forced to look at and address a lot of things from my past that I didn't want to talk about. So I started going into therapy, and after like a month, I was having panic attacks multiple times a day because I had resurfaced all of these things that I just kept pressed down. But after putting in the time, putting in the effort, I was on a good medication plan. I had an awesome therapist, and things started to get a little bit better. For me, though, the biggest change, and everybody's story is different. Anybody who has overcome any sort of mental health battles has a different story. And for me, what it was connecting with nature. That sparked something in me that I can't really explain. My wife and I went on a vacation in 2017, and I climbed a mountain. I got to the top of the mountain, and I was just, physically took my breath away hiking up a mountain, but also just there was something up there. I got teary eyed, and I just got over flooded with emotion, and I couldn't put a finger on what it was. And it was, looking back now, it was some, the physical and the emotional and spiritual kind of connection of overcoming these mountains, it did something to me. So we decided in 2018 to move out to Colorado, and my panic attacks disappeared almost like that. I was able to get off
Wow.
my medication, slowed down my therapy, and eventually got out of therapy. And for me now, it's just having this nature outlet has been a complete game changer with me. And I still feel it when my anxiety and stress will start to build up a little bit. My wife and I will just look at each other and say, "Hey, we need a day out in the mountains." And I'll unplug for the day. We drive out west a couple hours, spend the day climbing rocks and doing all that. And then I come back and I just feel completely reset and at peace. So everybody's story is different. I've seen some people overcome it with, cannabis or THC or whatever. Like that'll help some people. Other people, it's going to the gym and lifting heavy weights. For me personally, it has been climbing mountains. And that has been the thing that has really helped me push through. So right now we're in Colorado. There are 58 peaks that are over 14,000 feet tall. We just knocked out number 30 a few days ago. We're on a path to do all 58. Hopefully we'll have that done within the next couple of years. And then I'll just find my next big project after that.
That's incredible. Incredible story for sure. How much has the support of your wife meant to you over the years?
That's been huge. And I think, she was supportive from day one. When I said that I wanted to get into therapy, I think that's something that a lot of people can kind of be a little bit scared of when they're, we were just dating at the time. We were living together, but we weren't even engaged. We weren't married at the time. And I told her I wanted to get into therapy, and I was terrified to tell her because, in my head, the reaction is going to be, "Oh my God, you're crazy. I need to get out of this house and go find somewhere else to live." But she was extremely supportive from day one, and that has been huge. I've been so blessed to meet my wife Emily. We're coming up on we've been married since 2020, but we've been living together for almost 10 years now. And whether it has been, wanting to move to California or get a new dog or, start this career in fantasy football and quit my job and dive headfirst into this, making almost no money, she has been supportive of every step that I have wanted to take in my life. And then I try to do the same for her when it comes to, starting a bakery, starting a new job, all these things. I don't want to turn this into an Emily show, but I could talk about her for the next
It's
hour.
okay.
She's an
It's
amazing
okay.
woman, and we both support each other well.
I love how connected she is with so many people in the fantasy industry too. So it's cool. It's really a neat story.
She will be bringing pies. Like I said, we're doing the Scott Fishbowl draft this Sunday, and
That's
she's
right.
actually at the kitchen right now making 6 pies that we'll be bringing to the draft, cut up in little pre-cut slices, so everybody will get to have a bit of that.
That's awesome. Now tell me about the Scott Fish Bowl live Denver this year.
Yeah, super stoked about that. I had last year was the first year SFB 12 that Scott Fish did the live drafts, and Denver unfortunately didn't get a live draft. But we were looking at the people that were in our slow draft division, and I said, well, I know Stompy. I know that he lives in Fort Collins, and I know Roxanne lives in Denver, and I know Jeff lives in Denver. And I start putting it all together. So I reached out to everybody individually, realized that everybody that was in the Denver slow draft was in Denver. And I said, "Hey, let's just get together for the draft. Like, we don't have a live event, but that doesn't mean we can't just get together anyway." So Scott ended up being super cool about it. On the fly, threw together a Denver shirt. So we were able to buy the shirts and show up to the live draft. And then we got one again this year. So this year is going to be a little bit bigger. This is actually a formal live draft. So we're going to be at Improper City. It's going to be a really fun group. We've got Jordan Fiegelman with MB Fantasy Life is going to be there. Josh Larkey is going to be there. All the same people from last year are coming, plus a few more. So that'll be on Sunday. We're super stoked about that. It's been a lot of work putting this draft together, a little bit more than I expected, but
Yeah.
having a blast doing it.
That's cool. Yeah, I hosted the Seattle Live Draft last year, and it was just so much fun. It's such a great experience. Finding out how many people locally are around you within the community and the industry is really a neat thing, and it's definitely a lot of fun, a lot of work. I'm heading down to LA for the Trophy Smack draft this year, so that's in 2 weeks. I'm
That looked
really excited.
that looked awesome last year. I saw like they put together like a promo video afterwards. That looked like
Yeah.
an incredible time. So you'll have fun there, I'm sure.
Yeah, it should be fun. I'm excited. But obviously, you dive in straight into the fantasy football industry and doing all that hard work. It's paid off. You've obviously connected with Joe Bryant, football guys. What has that experience been like for you?
Um, it's been a dream for me. I have been a Football Guy subscriber since I was in high school. Stumbled across their website, couldn't even tell you how long ago. And that was always like there were two websites that I always used that I said were like my secret websites that I didn't want people to know about. And it was Football Guys and FF Today. And that was actually one of the first big edges that I was able to find in fantasy football is we were hosting our site on or we were hosting our league on ESPN. So I would read all of the ESPN content. And then if I would disagree with any of Matthew Berry's takes or Eric Carabel's takes, I knew that my league mates were only reading ESPN content. So I would try to find where Sigmund Bloom or Jeff Hasley or one of these guys would disagree with Matthew Berry or one of these guys at ESPN and then leverage that in making trades. So Football Guys and FF Today were both companies that I really, really wanted to work for. So getting to work right now with Joe Bryant, it's still surreal. I've been there since 2021 now, coming up on 2.5 years. And every single day, it's still, it's a man that I idolize. And I have started my mornings reading that email that he sends out every single day for the last decade. So it's a really cool experience. But I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't somewhat lucky to get that job. I mean, there's a lot of really, really talented people that are out here in the in the fantasy space, putting out amazing content and working their butt off. Really smart people, and for whatever reason, the stars just aligned for me. Right place, right time. I had been putting in the work, and I was still new enough in the industry when Joe and I connected that I wasn't getting a ton of attention from other websites. And Joe and I hit it off, and he brought me on staff. And at the time, it was just to be a content creator and do some writing here and maybe a short video here and there. And then I started helping out with some of the operational things that I'd learned from the other websites that I'd worked at in the 2020 season, turned into a part-time job, turned into a full-time job. And now, it's cool to be what I think is a pretty integral part of what we're doing over at Football Guys.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And Football Guys content. What's your favorite aspects of the content? What do you think's made it so special over the years?
Well, I think what we do really well at Football Guys is, and this all starts from the top with Joe and Kevin. You're over at Football Guys. You know how it is. You get to see it. I mean, the culture there is just unbelievable, and I am a firm believer that culture starts at the top. And Joe is just such a great guy. But what he allows every person to do on staff is just to be themselves. I feel like so many people, like when you start writing for a website, they say, this is how we write. And you have to fit yourself into this mold of a content creator. And, I see it all the time where somebody starts writing for a different website and they start changing up their style and they try to lean more into analytics or more into film based on wherever they're writing from. And Joe doesn't care what you're doing. He wants everybody to be genuinely themselves. And you see that. You've got people like Sigmund Bloom, who the way that he can read the tea leaves in news stories and beat reports and things like that, second to none. I don't think anybody in industry can do it better than him. And he's got his own way of analyzing the game. And then you have Matt Waldman, who is a scout that if he wanted to, he could quit Football Guys today and go work for any of the 32 NFL teams and be the guy out there on the field scouting college players. And he leans heavily into that film player approach. Then you got guys like John Norton that are looking at the big scheme of defenses and how things are going to change there and looking at it through an IDP lens. And then you have guys like Adam Harstad who are living and breathing in spreadsheets and pulling out, these incredible analytics to help make their point. That's what I really like about Football Guys is it's kind of a choose your own adventure there. Like when you sign up at Football Guys, you're not signing up for advanced analytics only, and you're not signing up for film breakdowns only. We have such an amazingly talented team of creative people there that you can pick and choose whoever's content you want to consume. I think we're up to 93 people on staff now. Kevin, we'd have to check. I can look back in Basecamp. But we have 90 something people on staff. It is ludicrous to expect anybody to sign up at Football Guys and read every piece of content and watch every podcast and show that comes out. So what you do is you sign up, you find the guys that you align with most, and then you just consume their content. So that's what I like about Football Guys is that Joe allows everybody to be themselves.
That's awesome. That's great. And Joe, he loves the game. He loves the game of fantasy. He loves the fantasy football experience, which is to me the foundation is the league experience. So in your opinion, what makes a great fantasy football league?
So I say this all the time, an in-person draft. And we are so lucky to be doing this with Scott Fishbowl over the last couple of years now. But my home league, we do this every single year. We still get together for our drafts. I feel like that is the best thing about fantasy football. The numbers and the competition and all that stuff is fun. But for me, more than anything, it's the camaraderie. I talk about my home league that I started when we got straight out of high school. And you see it all the time. There's friends that are friends in high school and then they graduate and go to different colleges and move to different states and everyone just kind of goes their own ways. These 10 guys that are in this league with me, sorry, 9 guys plus me. Yeah, it's a 10-team league. I don't care. Sure, it's casual, whatever. We have fun with it. But these 10 guys, 9 guys plus me, the 10 of us are just best friends, and it has kept us together for the last 14 years now. We still talk every single day, in season and out of season. Our group chat is constantly going. We are the godfathers to each other's children's. We stand up in each other's weddings. Wives, fiancés, and girlfriends have all become friends over the year, and it's because we have this draft that we get together for every year. Back in 2020 when things were kind of weird with COVID and travel restrictions and things like that, my friends from Chicago, they packed up their cars, they drove across the country because they didn't want to risk flying, and we got together with a socially distant draft in Colorado and still found a way to make it happen. We actually just planned it today, August 27th. I'm going to be flying back to Chicago, and we've got it all set up. And I think that is the most important thing about a fantasy football draft is getting together. Doing those live drafts in person are so much more fun than just playing fantasy football on a computer.
Yeah, it definitely makes all the difference in the world when it comes to engagement and connection and just creating an atmosphere where a league can thrive. What do you have a favorite memory from your home league experience, or is it just the big picture?
I feel like a lot of my memories are at the expense of somebody else, but that's, how guys have fun. We make fun of other people. And
Yeah.
there was the one morning, oh my goodness, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I want to say 2015. I'm sure somebody in the comments or something will tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think it was 2015 that Le'Veon Bell and I think it was LeGarrette Blunt, I believe, the two of them got in trouble. I don't know if you remember this story or not, for smoking marijuana right outside the Steelers facility. And it was like that morning, breaking news, Le'Veon Bell just got in trouble for smoking. And everybody, well, not everybody at the draft, it was kind of, we were all whispering about it. Like, did you hear about Le'Veon Bell? Did you hear about Le'Veon Bell? But nobody wanted to say it. And we were like, all right, well, who's the guy going to be that's going to end up not knowing about the story? And sure enough, first pick of the second round, my buddy Brian drafted Le'Veon Bell, and the entire room just exploded in laughter. And to this day, we still give him crap about it, that he was the one guy that wasn't plugged in enough that morning to see the story and ended up drafting a guy who was suspended for the first 6 weeks.
That's perfect. I love it. I love it. Do you have a favorite last place punishment? Not necessarily something you've implemented, but something that you think is just a ton of fun and can make a very entertaining league.
Yeah, so we always struggled because we always tried to do like a huge season end punishment. And we'd always come up with this like big idea before the season, and then the season would come around and people would flake out on it or whatever. So we implemented, it's technically a smaller punishment. We do the lowest scorer every single week has a punishment. So it goes throughout the entire 17-week fantasy football season. And these videos are hilarious. The lowest score of the week has to go to the store and pick up a tall boy, a 24 ounce, big beer. I'm talking a 24-ounce beer, and they have to get it to the league, this video, before Thursday night football kickoff. And what they have to do is they have to shotgun this beer, 24-ounce beer, and then give their prediction for the week's fantasy football matchups. So it started off just, with a guy sitting in his kitchen, shotgunning a beer, trying to hold it down, belching, saying, I think Ben's going to beat Troy, and I think that David's going to beat Keith, and I think Peter's going to beat Austin. And then over time, it has developed where people are writing poems, and I did one on top of a 14,000-foot mountain, and, people are doing these on vacation and putting so much production value into this. So that's my favorite part about this league. We implemented a rule about 4 years ago. This will be the 5th year that we've done this, but every single week it gives us something to look forward to. And, it always gets dropped into the group chat about 15, 20 minutes before Thursday night football kickoff. We all have a good laugh, and that's just kind of how we start our week of football every week in season.
That's outstanding. I absolutely love that. Do you have a favorite way to determine draft order?
Yeah, so actually, what we've done for years in my home league, Sleeper Bowl actually picked up on last year. I don't know if you saw how they did this or not. They do a simulated Royal Rumble match where they assign, I forget if it's on Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, but it's basically just a Royal Rumble match where every single person is designated a character. They all hop in the ring, they all fight each other. When one person gets thrown out of the ring, they're the 10th pick. Next person gets thrown out, they're the 9th pick. So we've done that for sheesh, it's got to be 7 or 8 years now. We've been doing it for quite a while now. One of our buddies puts it together. I'm not a gamer. My buddy is, though. So he streams it all on Twitch. We all watch it live. We're actually doing that later this evening. We're going to be live streaming the Royal Rumble match to determine our draft order. It's fun. It's silly. It only takes a few minutes to set up, and it's completely random. So we've done that for the last few years, and it's always a good time.
I love it. Yeah, my league is actually pushing to consider that as the option this year. So,
Highly recommend.
yeah, no, it's definitely one of the things that I think is most exciting for determining draft order. Let's dive into some rapid fire questions. I'll just blurt out a question. Give me a quick answer that comes to mind. What do you love most about fantasy football?
I talked about it a little bit, but I think it's the camaraderie, the way it can keep groups of friends together. That would be it for me. You know, eh, I think at its core, that's what football does best is it brings people together. It keeps people engaged. It's really hard, especially when you start getting older and moving all over the country. Like my home league, for example, we have people in Chicago, Colorado, California, Nebraska, Arizona. We're scattered all over the place. And this keeps us together. It's really easy to just not pick up your phone and call a friend. Before you know it, 6 months have gone by, a year have gone by. And then, oh my God, I haven't talked to my buddy in 3 years. It happens quickly when you start getting up there in age. This gives us a reason to talk almost every single day and share news and rib each other and all of these sorts of things. So that's what I like about it is the camaraderie that fantasy football brings.
Great answer. Name a quarterback that you likely will take away in most drafts that you encounter.
Now, I hate to say this because the first guy that we're going to talk about, it's going to sound like blatant homerism here, but Justin Fields is a guy that I was beating the drum for last year. Again, I talk about some of the things that I try to do that I notice are against the grain. Everybody looked at Justin Fields' college production and said, this guy isn't going to rush much in the NFL. And what I saw was a scheme in college that kept him in the pocket and didn't want him running. And then I saw a new scheme in Chicago that was going to have him running a lot with no good receivers and a bad offensive line. So last year, I said, Justin Fields is going to rush for 1,000 yards this year. And everybody thought I was crazy. That's one of my favorite tweets to go back and look at the quote tweets and the replies, everybody calling me an idiot. We know that he rushed for 1,000 yards last year. So I was one of the big Justin Fields guy last year. And I think a lot of people just, ignored my analysis on Justin Fields and chalked it up as homerism. But here I am now going into, the Justin Fields' third year. I didn't want to be in on Justin Fields again this year, but seeing where he's getting drafted, I find myself drafting him so much. Typically, he's going off the board as QB5 or QB6, but I have him as my QB3, which doesn't sound like a huge difference. But I'm getting him as the last guy I see in the elite tier. It's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. And then Justin Fields is usually the guy hanging out there at QB6. He's a guy that realistically I'd be okay paying up for in the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts tier, but you can get him rounds later. So he's a guy that I don't have to reach for dramatically, just taking him a few picks ahead of ADP. I'm trying to get him on as many teams as I can because with these increased pass catch or these improved pass catches as he's going to have and DJ Moore and a healthy Darnell Mooney, and hopefully we can see something from Chase Claypool and Robert Tonyan and Roshan Johnson. With his rushing upside on top of this fantastic group of pass catchers, I think he's got as high as a ceiling as any quarterback in fantasy this year.
Love it. Now name 2 running backs that you will likely come away with in most of your fantasy drafts.
So Cam Akers, man, I was like, I don't want to say a hater, but I'd never really saw it with Cam Akers. Coming into the league, I thought that he was kind of a boring runner. I know he's got the measurables and projects to be a 3-down back and all that, but I just never saw anything on film that really impressed me all that much with Cam Akers. So I wasn't in on him as a rookie. Then year 2, obviously he was hurt. Year 3, I wanted nothing to do with him because he was, coming fresh off of that Achilles tear. But this year, again, it all comes down to ADP for me. If Cam Akers was getting drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round, I'd want nothing to do with him. But right now, he's consistently falling into round 7, round 8. Sometimes you can even get him in round 9. And at that price, I think it's crazy to be passing up on him because we have seen year after year that Sean McVay loves Cam Akers. And when you're looking at the running back position, all of the fun, nerdy metrics don't really matter to NFL coaches. At the end of the day, the most important thing when you're a running back is volume. And that's why you see these guys that are the RB2 or RB3 on their team. When the starter goes down, they're a top 10, top 20 spot start because we know they're going to get their volume. Well, if you look at the current Rams depth chart, there is nobody that is threatening him to take volume. We saw at the end of his rookie year, and we saw at the end of last year when it seemed like he had finally gotten past the Achilles injury, that Sean McVay won't shy away from giving this guy 25 or 30 carries per game. So you're looking at a guy that you can get very late in drafts that realistically has RB1 upside. So I'm not a huge fan of the talent when it comes to Cam Akers, but given his ADP this year, I'm drafting him everywhere. Another running back that I'm trying to walk away with is Brees Hall. And I know he's coming off the ACL tear, and there's a lot of data that says that you should avoid running backs coming off of ACL tears. But when you look at the guys that were outliers, that were able to bounce back immediately coming off of an ACL tear, they had youth on their size and they were very good athletes. And Brees Hall has both of those things. So even if I'm getting Brees Hall and he isn't all that effective for the first few weeks of the season, even the first half of the season, if he can return to 100% by the midway point of the season, you're getting a guy that genuinely could be the RB1. If he didn't tear his ACL last year, what we saw early in the season, he would be getting drafted in the first round, right around CMC, Eckler, Bijan. Brees Hall would be somewhere in that mix. You're getting a huge discount right now on Brees Hall. Everybody's saying that he's ahead of his ACL recovery. So I love getting him because ideally what you're getting is a guy that if you can make it into the playoffs, you're drafting this guy in the third or fourth round and plugging him in and hopefully getting 20 to 25 points per game.
Nice, nice. Now name two wide receivers and one tight end that you're going to escape drafts with.
So DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that doesn't really fit the mold for wide receivers that I target. I like to target guys that are on the upswing and guys that look like they are going to get better. Typically the guys that I'm looking at are 23, 24, 25 years old. The guys that you're hoping can improve off of their previous seasons. I don't think that DeAndre Hopkins is going to be better than the DeAndre Hopkins we've seen in years past. But right now, there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity as to where he's going to be playing in 2023 that I think people are just completely scared off by DeAndre Hopkins now. And his ADP reflects that. He's consistently going in the fourth round. Sometimes you can even get him in the fifth round. That's just mind blowing to me. I mean, this is DeAndre freaking Hopkins. And I know he's going into his age 31 season, but he has still looked like an elite an elite wide receiver when he's been on the field. Last year with Trace McSorley and Colt McCoy, he still averaged 10.7 targets per game. You look at his full season-long pace from last year, and he was projecting to hit almost 1,400 yards if he didn't have that early season suspension. So the concerns are that he doesn't have a team right now and that he's getting up there in age, and I understand that. But I think that we've just overcorrected by pushing him into the fourth and fifth round. And the other thing, people are afraid that he might land in a bad spot, might have a bad quarterback, might land on a bad offense. Can it be worse than Trace McSorley and Colt McCoy last year? Could it be worse than what we saw him doing during his career in Houston? This man is quarterback proof. He draws targets. He scores fantasy points. I'm not concerned all that much. I'm still drafting as much DeAndre Hopkins as I can. Another guy that I find myself targeting a lot, and I wrote an article on him, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this is one last year. I was very against drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that was when he was going in the fourth or fifth round. Now he's going early second round, and I'm in on it. What I saw in his rookie season was that he had a small sample size late in the year when DeAndre Swift and TJ Hawkinson were both hurt. And during that 6-week stretch, he went nuclear and he won a ton of people fantasy football leagues, but I just didn't think it was sustainable. I said, DeAndre Swift's coming back. TJ Hawkinson's coming back. They added Jameson Williams. I didn't think Amon-Ra St. Brown was going to be able to do it again, but after what we saw last year, it's just impossible to ignore. He has more catches through his first 2 years than any player in NFL history. I mean, this guy, once you start looking at his historical comps for the targets that he's pulled, the yards that he has accumulated per game, his receptions, it's wild because he is on very short lists and it's always like, Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And he's not the splashiest player. He does get a lot of manufactured touches near the line of scrimmage. He doesn't win routes deep downfield, but we've seen for 1.5 years now, last year and then the second half of 2021, that Dan Campbell wants him to be a featured part of the offense. They're going to manufacture touches for him. And what blew my mind is that he has seen 9 or more targets since that late season breakout, his rookie year that I talked about. Since that started all the way through the end of the last year, he has seen 9 or more targets in all but 2 games. So this guy is a target machine, especially in PPR and half PPR leagues. I'm trying to walk out with as much Amon-Ra St. Brown as I possibly can.
Incredible. How about a tight end?
I talked about this guy a lot last year, and now I find myself drafting a lot of him now. It's tough talking about tight ends because for me, so much of it comes down to strategy. Like I want to get Mark Andrews if he's falling into the late second round, but if that doesn't happen, then I'm looking at Darren Waller, and if I can get Darren Waller in the fourth or fifth round, I'm pulling the trigger there. And then if I can't get one of those two, what I find myself doing a lot is waiting for Chig Okonkwo. And Chigakonkwo has a realistic shot to lead his team in targets this year. I think he and Traylon Burks are going to be basically that entire passing offense. You look at the other guys that are on the Tennessee Titans, they don't scare me all that much. So you're looking at Traylon Burks on one side, you're looking at Chigakonkwo on the other side. And I think that he is just going to see a ton of work this year. And the biggest knock that people have for Chigakonkwo is that he's an undersized tight end. I don't care all that much because when you look at his numbers last year, he lined up in the slot almost exclusively. So you want these big tight ends, but he's not really a tight end. He's kind of like Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, these guys that are tight end in designation, but they take the majority of their snaps as a wide receiver. Just hyper talented, super athletic guy that can do a ton after the catch. I find myself drafting a ton of Chigakonkwo this year.
Nice, nice. What has been your biggest challenge you faced within the industry thus far?
Honestly, it's been a lot of the noise on Twitter. That's tough. It is, and I do my best to just block it out and not engage with it. But I've had a target on my back since day one, and I understand why. I talked about it a little bit. I know that I got lucky with the opportunity that I got at Footballguys, and sure, I worked hard and I set up that opportunity for myself, but there are people that are probably more qualified than me and better analysts than me that haven't gotten that same opportunity. So I understand why it put a target on my back, but it has been tough to say the least. I mute a lot of people and try to just ignore it and not engage with it. But it is tough when there's a loud section of people that would like nothing more than to see me crash and burn and get fired and publicly humiliated. It's tough knowing that those people are just constantly looking for any reason they can to jump down your throat.
Yeah, that's not a pretty part of Twitter for sure. And obviously, I wish people realized that that's a human being on the other side, more often than they do for sure.
That's why I think everybody should go to the expo. And I
Yeah.
will just blatantly plug the expo here. I've broken down so many walls with people that have these like perceived slights that, don't like me or think that I don't like them. And then you go to the expo and you realize, wow, we're all just a bunch of socially awkward nerds who love football. I mean, I think that's might be a little bit of a blanket statement, but for the most part, that's what a lot of us are in this industry. And a lot of that social awkwardness comes across in weird ways and gets lost in subtext on Twitter. So go to the expo. If you have any interest in growing in this industry, go to the expo because you're going to realize that everybody gets along pretty well in person. And a lot of these preconceived slights that you think exist on Twitter really don't exist at all.
Yeah, it's such an inclusive event, something that most people that go, they come back because it is a truly special event in the community. Name a few people that have just had a massive impact on you during your journey in the industry.
So oh gosh, man, this is a tough one. There are a lot of people. The first guy I'll give a shout out to is Chase Vernon, and we worked together at Fantasy Intervention when I was brand new. I mean, I had no reps. I'd never been on a microphone before. I'd never been on a show before. I'd never even published a long form article before. And he was brutal in his criticisms when I was new. And I think that helped me. A lot of people just crumble when it comes to criticism and feedback. I thrive on getting criticism. I want to know what I'm doing wrong so I can get better at it. And Chase would go through and say, you said 185 ums in this episode and you need to cut those out and things like that. So he really coached me up when I was new in the industry and helped me get better at what I did. Joe Bryant, obviously, talked about him a ton. He gave me a huge opportunity. He's somebody I've idolized for years. But I think one of the coolest connections that I made in this space was Mike Tagliere. Like I said, before I even got into the industry, just as a casual fan, I'd stumbled across some of his stuff on Fantasy Bros, and I was just enamored at how good he was as a writer. And I'd watch some shows here and there, but for me, I love writing. Writing is my passion, and he had such a good way of just putting really advanced, tough to grasp concepts into really easy to read and understand words. And I was just blown away by how he was able to do that. So he was somebody that I looked up to a bunch. And when I was still very green in the industry, I reached out to him and I thought, there is no way this guy's going to get back to me. He's got 90,000 Twitter followers. I've got a couple hundred. I'm a nobody in this space, but I shot my shot. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'm a huge fan. Is there any chance you'd be willing to hop on a show with me? And it just went so well. I was blown away by how kind he was and what a great person he was. And then he helped me additionally in like setting up connections with other people. He introduced me to Adam Rank and Kyle Yates and other people that I've looked up to in this space. And it's heartbreaking. I actually never got the chance to meet him in person. We would talk a ton, and we had phone calls, and we did a bunch of shows together. And the last time we had talked was right before the expo. We were talking a few days, about a week before the expo, talking about how excited we were to finally meet each other. And then he told me that he came down with a sickness and he wasn't going to be able to make it to the event. And then that was the last time we talked. So Mike, even before we had built a friendship, he was a guy that I idolized so much in the industry, and just the way that he carried himself and the way that he could get respect from people and always taking the high road. I've tried my best to just emulate the things that I saw and learned from Mike.
Yeah, truly one of a kind. Definitely missed for sure. Now, getting back to some unique opportunities you've had. You recently were on, was it Football Night in Chicago? What was that like for you?
That was a cool experience. That was really a surreal experience more than anything else. It wasn't the first TV spot that I've done before, but something about going on TV back in Chicago was really cool. Because especially with the older people in my family, and I'm not even talking super old, just parents, aunts, uncles, older cousins. I don't think they really understand what I do. They're like, yeah, Dave's got a podcast, good for him, and Dave's got Twitter followers. But I think that I was really able to bridge that generational gap with the TV appearance in Chicago, because then all of a sudden, I've got my in-laws and aunts and uncles sitting at home in Chicago watching me on TV, and I've got people my friends that are out at a bar and they see my face up on the TV, or somebody else was at a grocery store and they saw me on TV. So that was a surreal experience, because as soon as that aired, my phone started blowing up, and with people that happened to catch that. And I live in Colorado now, but born and raised in Chicago. I spent 28 years there. So this whole fantasy career kind of started after I moved out to Colorado. So for me, it was just kind of a way to show my family back at home that I actually was, kind of doing some pretty cool things. So that was a really cool experience, just because all of the people that didn't really understand what I had been doing for the last few years kind of got a quick chance to see what I was doing with that TV appearance.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. Really cool story. Obviously, you've done a great job with making a way in this industry. Do you have any advice for aspiring fantasy analysts, people that are looking to get more involved in the industry?
Yeah, I could talk about this a ton. And really, I think I say it all the time. I think Scott Fish has summed it up better than anybody else. Work hard, be a good person. I mean, those are pretty much the rules in this industry. And I see people consistently just shooting themselves in the foot by engaging with drama and refusing to take the high road and playing in the mud, whatever you want to say. People get so wrapped up in the drama that they end up hurting themselves in the industry and not even realizing it. We talked a little bit earlier about how I have a target on my back. And when I was new in the industry, I felt like I had to clap back at every single person that took a shot at me. And then I realized all it was doing was holding me down. And it was stressing me out. It was weighing on my mental health. It was a bad look for me publicly. So now I just mute those people, let them scream into the abyss, and just kind of focus on myself. But that's, I think, the best advice, the most succinct advice would be work hard and be a good person. But the other thing is to set goals for yourself. And that was something that I did from very early on. I had short-term goals, I had annual goals, and then I had long-term 3-year goals. And when I started this journey, when I decided in May of 2020 that I was going to quit my job and go full-time into this, well, not full-time pay at the time. I had some savings, luckily, that were keeping me afloat. But I said, I'm going to give this college try. I'm going in, I'm putting full-time hours into this, and I'm going to hope to make it. And I had, that was May 2020, and May 2023, I had a goal, and it was that I had to be making X amount of money. And if I wasn't making that money, I was washing my hands clean of the industry. I was going back to my sales job, and I was never talking fantasy football publicly again. And I wanted to have that out for myself, because I see a lot of people get stuck just kind of spinning their wheels without any goals and just hoping that something's going to fall into their lap. So I had goals, everything down from, you have to tweet X amount of times per day, you have to write X amount of articles per month, you have to host this many shows per week, you have to guest on this many shows per month. I was very structured and had goals for myself while I was coming up in the industry. now that I feel like I've, made it, I guess you can say, working full time at a company that I really want to be with, I've calmed down on the goals a little bit. Now I'm just kind of focused on being a better analyst and doing what I can to help at Football Guys. But I think that would be another important piece of advice for anyone trying to make it in this industry, is just to focus on goals rather than just, shooting tweets off into the abyss and hoping a job is going to fall into your lap. Work on networking with people, have goals, whether it's networking calls or tweets or shows, like have very structured goals that you can follow to make sure that you're staying on the right path.
That's outstanding advice, Dave. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I was looking forward to this show, man. We've been lucky enough to meet in person a few times now, so glad I was able to sit here and talk about this a little bit. Normally this is the time where I plug all of my stuff and say to follow me and all that, but I don't even want to do it. This was a fun show, and we just got to talk about the industry, talk about some football, and I'm having a good time.
All right. Well, hey, you've done a lot. I've been a big fan of everything you've been doing over the last few years. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do in 2023.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.